I honestly think that Agile was too popular for its own good. Like, I think that's kind of what happened. If something becomes so popular, everybody wants to do it. There wasn't the expertise around to fulfill the demand. And now people are seeing this rubble and mess and they're kind of thinking, like, hey, Agile is shit. It's dead. And we should stop doing it.
Hello, welcome to the next latest, greatest episode of Agile. Actually, one day we're going to get a bit of a rhythm going, but, enjoy it when it arrives. Today, joining Martin Hinshelwood and I is Martijn Dalmijn. He has been working in the world of Agile for a long time, and he's got a great book out there on sprint goals. Martijn, would you like to introduce yourself to whoever's listening?
Yeah, sure, but I'll keep it brief. Like, hi, I'm Maarten Dalmijn. I've worked in various roles: business analyst, QA, Scrum Master, Agile coach, head of product, lead product owner, and I've been doing that for around like 10 years. And I've also been writing for 8 years about the intersection of like Agile and product, and also a little bit of Scrum. And yeah, I published a book a year ago, and I'm of course super proud of that book. And currently, I'm working for myself for around 2 years, helping companies to meet the Feature Factory. And yeah, let's keep it at that.
If people want to find you, what's the best way to get a hold of you or connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, you can just connect to me on LinkedIn, or I've got my last name. If you Google for it, you'll find all the relevant places where you can. I've got a pretty unique last name, so I'm lucky in that regard.
Awesome.
I have the same benefits, Martijn.
Yeah, that's good. It makes life easier, right?
There's only two of us. There's me, and then there's the footballer.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Well, I think it makes life easier.
Sweet. What we had a rough idea of something to talk about, and there's been a little bit of commotion, I would say, in the world of Agile. There's a lot of noise about Agile is dead and it's all broken and stuff like that. And we'll use that as a launch point. And very recently, Scott Ambler's put a series of articles on LinkedIn. That's one example of people calling out that things haven't gone as well as we thought they were going to go. What's your thoughts on that, Martin? And that's a lob for either of you to take.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can start, right? So I honestly think that Agile was too popular for its own good. Like, I think that's kind of what happened. If something becomes so popular, everybody wants to do it. There wasn't the expertise around to fulfill the demand, right? And I think that's kind of what happened. And I mean, I work. I mean, I'm Dutch, right? So I can speak from the Dutch perspective. And as you know, we have the most Scrum Masters per capita, or close to the most. No, not anymore. Okay. Well.
No, I was totally agreeing with you. Yeah. You get the most PSTs per capita as well.
Yeah. So sorry. So what's very interesting is what happened in the Netherlands is everybody wanted. This is just a great example. Wanted to do the Spotify model, and then all these consultants came in and they rolled out the Spotify model. And they made a lot of money out of it, and then they left. And I don't think it was as big of a success as it was presented, and that's why I think we have the negative sentiment going on, because there are a lot of people that kind of flew in, did a lot of things, didn't have sufficient expertise, left, and they left the company with the rubble and the mess. And now people are seeing this rubble and mess, and they're kind of thinking like, hey, Agile is shit, it's dead. And we should stop doing it. And that's kind of, I think pretty prevalent at the moment. But I'm curious to hear your perspective. Maybe I'm saying it too black and white, but I think this is kind of what happens.
No, for me, that's exactly the story that I see as well. I see a lot of the demand has outstripped supply of competent people to be able to help do these things, and thus the bar is dropped till you fill the positions, right? Because companies feel like they needed to have people in those positions, needed to have Scrum Masters, needed to have Agile coaches. They couldn't find somebody at a particular level, or I don't know how much of this is driven by the companies themselves and how much is driven by recruiters. I mean, it's a supply and demand issue. And we've just ended up with, I go very, I guess I call it Dutch, Martijn, on this one. And I say there's just a lot of incompetent people out there that shouldn't be doing the role they're doing.
Yeah.
And it's yeah. And I think that was what I felt that Scott Ambler's series really covered that in that same idea. We're being a little bit more, maybe a little bit more blunt, although his title was very blunt. But it's just been this massive demand, lack of skills and knowledge. I think, I don't know what's encouraged. There's definitely things that have encouraged the lack of skills and knowledge. This idea that a PSM1 or a CSM is all you need. I still, even with all of the stuff that's happened over the last, I guess, couple of years, I still get emails from and see posts from people who are like, yeah, I've got this marketing background and I want to move into IT, and it looks like Scrum Master is a good way to get in. How do I become an entry-level Scrum Master? And it's like, you don't. It's not an entry-level position.
Yeah.
Well, you do have entry-level Scrum Masters, right? So I'll agree.
You have entry-level Scrum Masters, but the person coming in is not an entry-level person within the context, right?
Yeah, and we're now playing out Martin and the vocabulary game. Now, I think what you're both saying is Agile has become a victim of its own success, right? When they started innovating in this space in the mid-90s, they were trying to change the world of work. You know, that was what was being done. And, you know, Ken Schwaber's ruthlessness on it and his attention to it became a victim of their own success, right? Now, I've worked a lot with the Netherlands. I've been training in the Netherlands for many, many years and was there when ING did its first adoptions within their web team. And they were the very first ones in the Netherlands to do it. And they became very successful. And they had a lot of hallmarks of a really good Agile adoption. You know, it's executive buy-in. There was controlled experiments. There was feedback loops. There was adjustments. And they became so good, everyone went there. Now, unfortunately, it also spun out of that. There was a lot of seagull consulting going on. Are you guys happy with the term seagull consultants?
Oh, totally.
I get it.
I've done my fair share of seagull consulting, Simon.
Okay. Anybody who's never heard of it before, a seagull consultant flies in, makes a lot of mess and a lot of noise, poops everywhere, and then flies away. Now, Agile became the badge that everyone was after. So all the major, the big four, the big ones, they went after it. And because Scrum is very specific, and it's also the failure of Scrum is it's about one team. And there's no scaling pattern to it. So then you're on your own, basically. Now, it's a really hard sell to go into an organization and go, oh, if you scale beyond one team, you got to figure it out yourself. That's really hard to sell, right? So you end up with the Spotify model, you end up with, you know, scaling frameworks, all this stuff. And I've been at a number of institutions where they went, oh, well, our Agile experiments have run really well. You know, we did this really well. We ran an Agile experiment. It worked. Now we want to roll it out bigger. Can we have 100 Agile coaches? And, you know.
But it also I feel it's worse than that. It's kind of worse than that, Simon, because if you're the Agile coach that a particular, and I'm using that phrase really loosely, I definitely agree there's no such thing as an Agile coach, right? But that person to help out, that person to bring in some of those practices and ideas, the person, each team, each department, and all the way up the organization, the person they need is not, it's not a random punter like you would get if you go to Accenture and say, we need 100 Agile coaches, right?
Oh,
It's each of, if we were doing it well, which we agree it's not been happening, each of those departments would be able to hire their own person that suits their needs at the time and change that person over time as their needs outgrow the person they chose originally, right?
But this is, yes, and the naivety of Agile comes in. I've made some stupid decisions in time, and some of them are because it was naive. It wasn't a business-based decision, and it's cost me hundreds of thousands of pounds in my career. Now, it's really easy to say you're agile,
Yeah,
but to actually live those principles and run your business in an agile way requires process discipline. It requires economic discipline, all that cool stuff.
So I think one of the main things, so I'm going to give another perspective, right? Let's also be honest. It's incredibly difficult. I mean, let's say we're talking about the situation there. You have a big company, right? So they have got a complex system. It evolved over 50 or 100 or whatever years. It works, it's not perfect, but it works, to some extent. And then you want to change it. The system is going to fight back, right? Because the system wants to preserve itself. There's this tendency. So I think the challenge is, so let's say you've done an experiment, right? One team, you've changed, you've made it work. That doesn't mean you've changed the system. That means you've changed a part of the system, and a part of the system works better. But if you really want to change the system, like I don't think that's easy. There is no guidebook. And to be frank, I've never joined a big company and changed the whole system that it's agile. I've had success at startups and scale-ups, but I've never joined like a huge company. I'm talking about 10,000 plus people where I've been working with them for 10 years or however long it takes, because I don't think it happens in 12 months. And I've seen them make that big transition. And I think it's incredibly hard. And I think we also need to cut ourselves some slack here. Even if you know what you're doing, I still think it's incredibly hard, and there's a good chance you're going to be fired. You know what I mean? because they don't want it.
Anytime you're pushing boundaries and trying to change the status quo, there's risk.
Yes.
Right. And those risks either pay off or they don't, and there could be quite a significant financial penalty to that. I think of two big examples in my head. One is Fitbit.
Yeah, Fitbit.
Which you can see now. I'm putting, what's it called when you're not sure what the cause is?
Assumptions.
Correlation.
Definitely assumptions in here. Yeah. But if you graph their share price since the company existed to now, you can see, I could ask you, what moment do you think they tried to adopt large-scale organizational change? And you could point at that graph and say about 2011, and you would be right. Right? That you can see that moment. Now, did they adopt the change because the share price was dropping, or did the change cause the share? That's the bit you can't disseminate that. But there's definitely a correlation there, right? Not necessarily a causation. But then you look at organizations, a big success story is Microsoft, right? Who have are they a super duper agile poster child? Hell no, right? That's not the case of any organization. But they've made massive changes across the organization, applying, I think what Simon's talking about is the business story.
Yeah.
Right? It's not just about what matters at the team level, it's about what matters at the business level. And you have to change the system in order to be able to do that, and that means a lot of changing how people are measured. There's a really great I do a presentation. Microsoft, the guys that I work with at Microsoft get fed up doing presentations all the time on how they managed to change the organization. They found they were spending too much time doing those presentations and not enough time actually working and delivering product, right? So they flew a whole bunch of MVPs out to Redmond to teach us how to deliver those presentations so we could go deliver them at conferences and let them get on with building product. And one of the part of their story, their headline story, is they get asked a lot, what changed? Right? You've made this transition. It took them 8 years to go from nothing to a reasonable facsimile of what it is we're talking about, more or less, not quite where they are now, but where they got to. And they were asked what changed, and the answer is everything. Everything changed. The way they engage with their customers changed, the way they build their products changed, the architecture of their product changed, the way they organize people changed, the way they treat people, the way they do business, the way they do funding, the way everything about everything changed.
That's the essence, right? And that's exactly what Martijn, you are calling out, is that this stuff's incredibly hard. And if you're looking at a systemic change, the profundity of it is often missed by people. They think they can just execute, if I do this or I do that, it's going to fundamentally change it, and I can put a little bit of seasoning on a savory mince, but unless I go in there with the intent of making it a chili con carne, it's not going to be a chili con carne. It's going to be a savory mince with some chili sauce. And what the metaphor I've come up with is, when we introduce Agile, we need to introduce it in such a way that it becomes the vaccine, not the virus. And what we're describing is situations where we introduce agility or agile working practices, it becomes the virus. And the whole organizational system goes, wow, there's some weirdness going on here. This is a cancer. We're going to kill that.
Let's attack it.
And the whole organization then smothers it and destroys it. Whereas if we introduce it as a vaccine, it changes the system so that people don't freak out so much. And then we change everything, right? Because we're now able to be more resilient.
I really like that virus vaccine perspective. I hadn't thought of it that way before. And what I can say is, I can give you a very concrete example of what I often see go wrong in terms of the virus vaccine approach. So, for example, an experienced Scrum Master joins a team, then they're going to fix the issues that they see. You understand what I mean? Because they notice all these conflicts with the Scrum Guide or all these, but that means you're being a virus, because maybe the team is not ready for those changes, or they don't see those problems yet. And I think a way better approach is, which is what I do nowadays. I also did it wrong, right? I learned it the hard way, is actually you join a team and the first thing you start with is, what do they care about? What are the struggles they're facing? What is the thing that makes them like their job less? And you help them to fix that. And then you get a little bit of credit, and then you start fixing other things. But it's a very slow, gradual process. And I think very often that's not what happens. And then you get the virus as opposed to the vaccine.
Well, and I like it because the purpose of the vaccine is not to solve the problem, right? The purpose of the vaccine is to teach your system to solve the problem itself.
Yes.
And you do that with a little bit of teaching, a little bit of provoking, a little bit of, pointing, look, there's something weird happening over here. Perhaps you should fix that, rather than enforcing, rather than, it's not about the framework. It's not about the specific practice, even if it's things you've seen work in other places.
How many times have you seen the Agile Spanish Inquisition? It's hilarious. Every time I just imagine Monty Python, nobody expects the Spanish. Are you doing this? Tick, 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 like checklist. It's such an anathema to productivity.
I made a little graphic years ago, Simon, back in 2011, that no one expects the Scrum-quisition.
The Scrum-quisition.
Picture of dudes in red robes, right? It's and that's, back in 2011, Scrum Guide was only just around at that point, although Scrum obviously had been around for a longer time. And I think it's this I feel like it's the weddedness to, I guess, frameworks is probably the right word to use, or blueprint, right? I have this phrase that I use: "Nobody expects the Death Star." Right?
Death Star?
Plans for the Death Star. The plans for the Death Star turning up.
I thought
right?
you were a Star Trek fan, not a Star Wars fan.
Well, you've got to have a little bit of crossover, right? I didn't say I didn't like it, just that it wasn't at the top of my list. The organizations. I actually think it comes down to something a little bit more fundamental. This is just my feeling, and that's that they don't care. That's for me. That's a lot of it. Is the organizations that fundamentally don't give a shit how the sausage is made. Just make me the sausage so I can sell it. And I'm thinking of my experience. I had that experience in, for example, Merrill Lynch, where there was 15 people between me and the CEO as a software engineer. There was 15 people between me as the CEO, and you get 2 people up, and they're looking at spreadsheets and they don't care. They don't care about any of the actual process. They have no interest whatsoever. They're making decisions based on money.
So
right?
I think you're being overly harsh, though. I know.
Okay, well that's fair.
Why do you think he's overly
I
harsh?
often have that problem, Simon.
First of all, because I know Martin, and he loves to throw a provocative comment out there.
I never do that.
Maybe it's got something to do with the first name Martin. I'm noticing a correlation here.
Secretly, Simon, I'm Dutch. Secret.
Yeah, that's the thing I like about the Dutch culture and the Australian culture are very similar in the fact that if you say this nonsense, you'll call it as nonsense. Just come on, that's just nonsense. Just stop it already. I think individually people care.
Yeah.
Right, and I think systemically,
the system doesn't care.
The system is a function of a bygone age.
Yes.
All right. So I think the most dangerous thing that the British ever gave the world was the concept of the limited company. Up until the East India Company, you had to be a member of the royalty to trade at a certain level. And then the introduction of the East India Company brought about colonization, global destruction, a whole lot of bad. There's some good, there's some bad. And then it grew from that. So then we got the industrialization. Then we got to the age of so when industrialization, manufacturing, knowledge, and I think we're now in the age of collaboration. So we've transcended that. So knowledge, product, collaboration. Now, we're working with clients. So we've all worked with people who've struggled to understand the product idea deeply, like and form product and develop it. And agility is one of the supporting things. Now, one of the things you're talking about there, Martin, is that people are adopting frameworks or practices. And I think the step forward and the way out of this is to get more principle grounded. And if we focus more on the principles and less on the practice and mechanics, it's going to be harder work, but it's going to be more beneficial in the long run. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I see principles as kind of providing like intent, right? Like this is what we're trying to achieve. This is why it's important. But how exactly you're going to do it, you have to figure out. And I think that's incredibly powerful because, let's be honest, it's always very situational. I mean, to give a very good example, I worked at startups where I kind of rolled out feature teams and I had massive success. But I also worked at another company where I actually moved a feature team to a component team. And it was necessary, right? So and it made a big difference. So I'm just saying, like, what could be like a worst practice in one situation can be a best practice, or at least a good practice in another situation. And I think that's the key, like just copy pasting stuff. So I call this copy paste agile. So we kind of we had the Wild West Agile before. There was kind of before the Agile Manifesto. There was no Scrum guide. And and then they started codifying it. There was a Scrum guide, and I think we kind of entered the copy paste agile era, where they're kind of copy pasting stuff like the Spotify model, Scrum,
I think we've been there for a while.
Yeah. And now I think we should enter, and that's what I call the agnostic agile era, where actually it's going to be based on principles, or you use a pattern, but then you really reflect on, when does this pattern work? When does it not work? And if you roll it out, you evaluate, hey, did it have the intended effect? And maybe you start small. And I think that's where we are right now. I hope, maybe we're going to stay in the copy-paste agile era, but I think something has to change. And
No, I love
I'm gonna
agnostic. Hang on, I love that term agnostic agile, and the way that you presented it, because it is true sense of agility, right? So being empirical, not dogmatic.
Yeah. But it's really sad, right? So because Agile Manifesto was supposed to be agnostic, and now we have to call it agnostic because, I feel that's sad, right? Sorry, Martin, I cut you off.
There's already an agnostic agile movement, has been for a little while. It's been recognized. It was actually a Dutchman.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. I've never. Go ahead.
Arie van
Bennekom. Yeah, I know him. He wrote the Agile Manifesto. He was one of the.
He was a co-author to the Agile Manifesto, and he has a agnostic agile kind of movement that I've been looking at for a little while, and it's interesting because I think people, it's difficult to sell. I've been talking for years that you can't install Agile or DevOps in an organization, right? And it's going to be different in every organization every time you do it. So the purpose of somebody like myself coming in to help an organization, it's true for all of us, is to help as many people understand those fundamental principles so that they can make more of the right decisions. And I'm saying right's a bit polarizing, right? But right versus wrong decisions, more effective versus less effective decision making, and they're able to make those choices. And I've got I looked this up because I thought it was pertinent. There's a Deming quote.
Deming, always there's a Deming quote.
There's always a Deming quote for it, but not new stuff. Experience by itself teaches nothing. Without theory, experience has no meaning. Without theory, no one has no questions to ask. Hence, without theory, there is no learning. And that's that principles piece, right? That if you don't understand the basis upon which the choices can be made, you don't actually have a choice. So when you go into an organization and they're like, the typical consultant, right? The question is irrelevant. Scrum is the answer, or the question is irrelevant. Safe is the answer, or the question is irrelevant. Spotify is the answer. That's the doing something without understanding the theory behind it. Why is that thing?
No, there's a really good reason that happens, and it's a simple business reason. It's very easy to sell frameworks, practices, and mechanics, right? Because you can sell that. You can go, here it is, here's the guide, here's the manual, I can teach you, I can sell you loads of training courses, we can put everyone through that. And we've all been there. We've all been part of this, like, okay, here's the sheep dip, everybody gets a PSM or a PSVO or a CSM or a, whatever. It's much more challenging to teach people a new way of thinking. And to help people understand empiricism and running small experiments and actually empowering them to run small changes. And you can change stuff. And there's one time at Bandcamp, we'd just done a team boot up, and we take them off site for 5 days, and we taught them about the fundamental principles of agility and product, and come up with a vision and a statement and build a story map and refine it to a product backlog and agreed what was going to work and did a ways of working, all that cool stuff. So the team was spun up, ready to go. And so we went back to the office on the Friday afternoon, And they decided to move around so that rather than sitting apart, that they could pepper pot. So you could have a QA near a coder, near a... Now, as they started to unplug their monitors and PCs to move things around, a manager walked past and went, "What are you two doing? What are you lot doing?" And I said, "Oh, we're just moving where we sit, because it's going to make us more effective as we use this new way of working on Monday morning." He said, "Oh, you're not allowed to move computers. You've got to be a member of IT compartment to move a computer. You're breaking company policy at this point."
Yep.
And that was the bell. That was the death of Agile in that company.
It's
Yep.
so sad.
It's holistically true. I remember years ago, this was before Microsoft did any move towards agility. Brian Harry, who was the product unit manager, Martijn, of the Azure DevOps team back in the day, he had a lot of technology background and a lot of foresight, vision, and bullheadedness. I think is probably also something you need. I know Simon's good at that. To be able to push in a particular direction and bring people along. And he talked about he did an experiment, and he called it what did he call it? A null build. He called it a null build. He was struggling with understanding why it took so long for their product to get to production, right? So what he did this experiment where after they'd released the product, so they'd done passed all of the checks, gone through all of the loops to it failed somewhere, bring it back, change the code, fix it. Okay, now they got that version that worked of their product. And he said, now we're going to do it again with this version of the product that we know passes everything. And it took 8 weeks to get the product out the door. And that's with nothing getting in the way of getting the product out the door, because all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed. And that's like an experiment to figure out what is the fundamental thing, or one of the fundamental things that are causing our blockage, right? Well, let's fix that. Yeah. Right.
Sorry. So what I like about your story, right, is the focus is on the results. You understand what I mean? We want to have this result in 8 weeks. And what I think what very often goes wrong is that we actually talk too much about how we're going to do it. Because I've noticed actually that I rarely talk about Scrum or Agile or mention any of these words, because I just talk about the problems they're facing, how we're going to fix them. You understand what I mean? So there's no need to talk about Agile or Scrum, because basically we've got a problem and okay, so how are we going to fix it? And I think that's the key. If we focus more on the results and maybe the principles, instead of saying, oh, we're going to do this or that, to fix it, because that's in the end what matters. Like, are we getting results? And not are we rolling out the framework?
I love that. So you're talking about either a business outcome or a people outcome. Either we're going to get closer to our customer, we're going to get faster time to market, or we're going to improve our market share, or everybody's going to want to turn up at work and be a little bit happier, more productive at work. And how are we going to get there? And I think that's probably agility at its heart, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to if we apply this copy and paste, or we'll use this framework, then executing the framework becomes the thing. And it's like in the UK, there's a program called Strictly Come Dancing. It's where they get these celebrities and they pair them up with professional dancers, and they learn to dance. And you can see in these early weeks, before they actually understand dance, sometimes you can see them counting out loud. They're doing 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're going through the motions, but it's not a joy to watch. What is a joy to watch is the transcendence, those that are good enough, and because there's a voting out and the whole thing. By the end of it, they can dance, because they get it, they understand the principles, and they can apply the techniques at the appropriate timing, right?
Yeah, and that's incredibly hard, and not everybody gets it. So yeah, no.
Yeah, not everyone makes it through. So how can we help people embrace the learning?
Go ahead, Mark.
I'm not 100%. This is something I struggle with, Simon, because I had an experience that's stuck in my head for years. I think it was from 2008.
Oh, that's a long time. Was it the crisis?
Yeah, that's a long time. I was reading a blog post, and it started off with, if you're reading this, you're already in the top 10%.
Okay.
And the idea it was putting across is that most people aren't interested in lifelong learning, aren't interested in continuing to evolve the thing that they already know works, because maybe there's a better way, maybe there's a different way that's slightly more effective. Most people, and I'm definitely generalizing here, okay? Most people want to just do the thing, do their job, and go home to their family or whatever it is that they want to do other than work. Whereas I've always been lucky that my job and my hobby coincide. Right? My hobby was coding, and I became a coder. My hobby was then moved into DevOps. You know, that was my side gig when I was a coder, and then it became my main gig. And then in doing that as my main gig, I realized that DevOps doesn't solve problems. Like, tools don't solve problems, people solve problems. So then you start talking about process. So process became my side gig, and then it became my main gig, right? So I've always done something that I'm extremely passionate about, and like and want to do. I could have stayed a software engineer, right, and still been doing that and probably earning good money doing software engineering. But that following the principles, right? Adopting those principles into your worldview, adapting it, that triple loop learning, right? You actually change your worldview based on what you learn, is not something that is taught. Certainly not something that you learn in school, very much the opposite, right? Everybody has to do the same thing at the same time, right? Everybody, well, turn to page 36, right? That's everybody doing the same thing at the same time. And there's not really that encouragement to differentiation, to lifelong learning. There's encouragement towards conformity and do what you're told to do. So bucking the system, right? The Americans call it bucking the system, is not a common thing to do. So I think that's the fundamental thing. How do we encourage people? How do we as a society encourage people to be more entrepreneurial in themselves, not just in the money forum?
Yeah, so I think we are lifelong learners. So I don't completely agree with you. And I mean, I'm just going to take a slightly different perspective. I think we're lifelong learners in the areas we're interested in. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Because, for example, look behind you. You've got board games, a lot of them. So you have a lot of interest for that. So probably you read a lot. You do. I mean, there's this natural interest, and I think one of the challenges is, if you want to get if you want to get a job, you need to fit in the box, right? You need to be a marketing manager. You need to be a product manager, and I think that's the hard part is, you need to find something that fits with your interests, but it's also a paid gig. You know what I mean? And if you're an entrepreneur, there's more flexibility. But entrepreneurship is incredibly risky and scary for most people. So I
agree. People like stability but that's static trumps dynamic, right? Yeah. So if we but that's what I mean by that. While humans are lifelong learners of what they're interested in, the group of people who would be willing to take the little bit depends on the context, right? But the risk of changing adapting what they're doing based on what they learn, the actual changing the worldview part, I think is not as common as we would like it to be.
All right, so you're both in agreement that there needs to be the connection. We find it easier to learn with things that we're closely aligned to. So do you want to finish off your thought on that, Martijn?
Yeah, but I mean, curiosity, I think that's what it's about, right? I think the curiosity, if you have that, I've also been in jobs, right? Like where I initially had curiosity. So I was a QA. I knew nothing about being a QA. And I lost curiosity at some point. I was like, this is boring, for me. It became boring. No judgment. Like, I'm just saying for me, it became boring. And the moment I noticed that, I realized I have to do something else. I cannot wait because life is short. Yes, I want to make money, right? But the moment I'm not curious anymore is for me a clear sign something's up. I'm just a drone going through the motions. I might still be delivering a ton of value. They might still be happy with me. But I think in the long run, you're not going to be at your best because you don't have that drive. You don't have that curiosity. And yeah.
So my question on that, Martijn.
Yeah. Maarten.
Okay, so yeah, Simon was trying to differentiate, right? How I know more people that are in the context of they've got to that boring point, right? That they've realized their job is shit and boring, and they don't change it. They stick with it for 20 years.
Yeah.
And I think this is where we really have to tap into the core principle of agility and that principle of curiosity with positive intent. Now, if we start exploring complexity thinking, and this is where I love using the Cynefin framework for understanding as the tool that Snowden invented it for. A lot of the time there's constraints around people. It's either the system they're in or the constraints around them that while it may appear an obvious choice, there are circumstances that prevent them taking that leap of faith or making the change. So I think the real opportunity for agility, for agile, for people doing what we do is to create an environment or to help the system encourage curiosity with people. So if we can help people be curious at work, if we can help them find that joy, that happiness, that satisfaction, that purpose. And I think this is the essence of agility, is to empower people so that they can become, accountable citizens. That's where I really find it fun, the humanity of it, the humanity of work. Now, sometimes this is orthogonal to the way an organization works, where you just, you're a minion.
Yeah. But let's take a look at age, right? That's one of the constraints. Like, I wouldn't like it to be, but it is. Let's say you're above 50, you start applying for jobs, and you start to apply for jobs where you don't have so much experience because you want to try something new. Good luck. Good luck, which is sad, which is incredibly sad. So what are these people going to do? They've got a mortgage. They're going to stay in their job. They're going to stay in their lane because they've got kids. They might be going to university or whatever, there are bills to pay. It's sad. It's sad.
Yeah. That's the world I'm in, right? And the thing is that we've got aging parents. Your kids are at the latter stages of university education, or what have you, or, so there's a lot of outgoings. And so you got to watch your pennies. And so sometimes you just suck it up and get on with it because the option's going hungry. And that's really not a good choice. I like my food too much.
But I also respect it, right? I mean, if it's necessary, it's necessary, right? I mean, I also think that's also the reality. When you're younger, you have more options. That's because you just have less commitments, less attachments. And then.
So I guess my intent with the direction of that conversation was how do we create an environment in organizations within which less people feel constrained, feel like they have to be sheep dipped in whatever it is you dip sheep in, Simon.
Sheep dip, funnily enough. Yeah. Well, I think this is there's been a reasonable amount of work around this, and people who are connected to the purpose. This comes back to the autonomy, mastery, purpose piece. People who are empowered, people who are connected to visions, people who know their constraints, their boundaries, and have some freedom of movement are more effective. We know that. Now, I think some organizations are more able to support this, right? Because if I'm in a product organization or we're innovating, it's much easier because the folks who are working there. I think there is a huge opportunity now in creating ecosystems of companies. And if we can build that up between companies, so it is not the traditional one company trying to win over another. If the more we try and generate win-win partnerships between individuals, between organizations, and if we start small, that will eventually take on. Because Martijn, Mr. D, you've done a number of collaborations since you chose to become an entrepreneur, right? You've collaborated with a number of different individuals, organizations, right? And it's helped you, hasn't it?
Yeah, it definitely has, because for example, I did Scrum.org trainings together with PhDs. I'm not a PhD. I'm not, how do you say, I don't have many years of training under my belt. So I learned a lot from that, so that was incredibly helpful. Of course, what I brought to the table was my experience as a product owner and to these Scrum trainings as a product manager. But you learn a lot from collaboration. I'm not going to say I'm the best collaborator ever, to be honest. I'm a little bit of a Einzelgänger, I like doing stuff alone. But I think with the right partnerships, it makes a big difference, because other people are just better than you at certain things. And you just learn so much from that as well. Like, I think Martin as well, like when I see him, he also writes about his setup and like with his camera. And you read those articles and you learn so much from it. So I'm incredibly grateful for those kind of things as well. I learn a lot from reading as well, not just ecosystem collaboration.
Yeah. So sharing.
Yeah.
But that comes back to that. If you're reading this blog post, you're already in the top 10% story, right?
Yeah, that's a nice hook. Like in nowadays times, that's called a hook.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't think you're in the top 10%. To be frank,
right? Whoever is out,
but
I'm an elite.
I don't think there is the percentage is made up.
I know it is.
Right, but the idea that formed the percentage, I don't think is invalid at all. Most people I know don't sit there and somebody asks them it's like that pub conversation, Simon. Right, when I'm sitting in the pub with a bunch of people and somebody says something, and other people go, "Is that really true?" The other person says, "Yes, I know, because my brother's sister's wife told me," right? And everybody just accepts it. Whereas I'm pulling out my phone and going, "Really? Is that? No, look, there's the data," and nobody gives a shit, right? Because they've already made up their mind.
It's the goodliest truth. It's the best truth. It's the real truth. Everything else is not truth.
Yeah,
fake news, right? But that's I think there's a systemic lack of interest, which is where that top 10% idea comes from. A systemic lack of interest in knowledge or value in knowledge. So answering that question, actually having a look at the data, actually being inquisitive and figuring out whether this way is better than that way, or trying this and experimenting. This is not how most people think about the world. And I'm not saying that most people can't think about it that way. I'm just saying that they don't think about it that way.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
We started this whole conversational fork with thinking about how do we encourage learning? Yeah. How do we encourage growth and learning? And what we've discussed is there's a lot of context to it. There's a lot of constraints to it, that it is tough to be continuous learning. And a lot of the time, organizations, like every single one of my clients, suffers from managing WIP. Now, if you're overwhelmed with WIP, that means this personal development, learning, reflection is then pushed into your own time. And if you've got a life, and this is the thing, I think we've got it wrong. Talking about a work-life balance, that's the wrong way around. We should have a life-work balance, where our life and our humanity is the driver, right? So that we're like Martin D said earlier, it's a short, joyous life, right? So we got to enjoy it while we can, because the moments will pass. So if we think about all those things, when we're looking at organizations, helping them, what I'm formulating now is the thought, the first actionable step really is to get people to manage WIP. Not for the sake of managing WIP, but to help deliver the business value so that they can do all this good learning, curious stuff. What's your thoughts on that, Mr. D?
I completely agree, but I mean, I don't think with and, maybe that's nicer to say. And I think one of the challenges is very often what I see is that the teams don't want to pick up so much work, but it's the system, that kind of enforces. We have 100 objectives. Here, teams, here 100 objectives. And I think that's the main challenge. Like, where does that high WIP come from? What I also see sometimes, they've got a lot of legacy systems. Maybe they have a lot of production issues that can cause a high WIP. It could also be another very good reason for a high WIP is that all the teams are dependent on each other. So they have very few initiatives that they prioritize. But then when they start to work, they realize, oh, wait, we need this and we need that. And that's, I think, that's what makes it so damn hard. Like managing WIP, like I agree, but where does the high WIP come from? And very often it's not what happens at sprint. I mean, it also happens at sprint planning. Don't get me wrong, that they drag too much in. But it's all the other stuff that adds up, I think, and that puts them over the limits. And that's why I think it's, you need to manage WIP, but it's a symptom, right? Why is the WIP high? Is it just because what is happening at sprint planning? Is it because they are a component team and everybody needs them? Are they working on a legacy system so that basically everything they pick up, they've got 10 issues so maybe there's a quality I mean, there are all kinds of reasons. And that's what makes it fun, but that's also what makes it hard.
Yeah.
But yes, and if we don't really focus, I think that's my epiphany, my recommendation is like we need to get after that from a values and principles place. Unless we give people the capacity and the time and space to improve, like how many times have you seen teams shortcut the review and retro? How many times have you seen them circumvent feedback loops? Because
very often.
Because they're too busy, right?
But Simon, it's because they haven't agreed to the feedback loops, right? They feel like those feedback loops are imposed upon them because we're being forced to do Scrum. Therefore,
the virus approach, basically.
Virus, right? Rather than them choosing to do those feedback loops. I've been really, and this is not necessarily, I mean, at the team level, we know the answer to this. It's what Martin was saying. You just go talk to them. What are your problems? Okay, let's focus on dealing with those, right? Whether we use bits of Scrum or bits of Safe or bits of whatever the heck, it doesn't really matter. What you might end up with eventually as you evolve your team probably looks a little bit like Scrum, right? But whatever, right? Whatever they happen to be doing. I think the harder part is, like we've been talking about, it's not the individual teams that are the problem, it's the system. because the reason that they're forced to do Scrum is because the system forces them to do Scrum, because the system makes a decision. I was saying to Martin before we came on, I've worked with 2 organizations where professional services organizations working with customers where Scrum ended up in the contract. So that's even worse than just being imposed. Like it's legally imposed it upon themselves. Even when they realize it's a bad idea, they can do nothing about it, right? And I've been exploring / reading a lot about open space Agile. You've probably come across it. It's been out there. There's a few different flavors of it, but it's that that's the Martin was talking about organizational change, right? And it's hard, and the system pushes back against that change. But the system pushes back against that change because there isn't a big enough wave pushing you in a different direction. And that's what the way we've traditionally tried to approach that is through training, right? If you train enough people in the organization, you'll have enough people pushing for change that you'll actually force the system to change. But I think that's not enough anymore, because we're hitting that was maybe fine when my biggest success in moving an organization in a direction, right, is an organization where we actually trained every person in the organization within a couple of weeks. We did the APS, and everybody from the CEO to the guy who drives the forklift in the warehouse all went through the APS together with the software teams. And that realization that a lot of those folks had within the context of how they could be involved in the process created a catalyst for change. That and getting Ken on a call with their leadership team and him asking them one question, you'll like this, Martin, which was, what's your goal? Right? And they said, we don't know, we don't have one. And Ken had a tirade rant at them for being totally incompetent to lead an organization because they had no goals and directions, and ended up hanging up on them. But that all together, because you're upset because somebody's telling you what to do in your own business, and then after a couple of weeks, you kind of realize, wait a minute, yeah, we probably should have been doing that once you calm down, right? And all of that together created this massive catalyst for change in the organization. But you can't. There was like 96 people in the organization, right?
Yeah.
You can't go do that for somebody like Microsoft with 220,000 people. It's just not. You would be years of effort, and by the time you get to the tail end of the people, the first lot of people have had to give up because nothing's actually changed.
Or they changed further, like they evolved in another.
Further, yeah, they could all different. So.
There's a few
the thing I like
right?
about this idea of open space Agile is that it includes a much more holistic group of people within that time space. And
yeah, and
Simon's got a...
Well, the thing is, as soon as you get to organizations of a certain size, like open space Agile has a lot of preconditions around it.
Yeah, sure. You need enough. You need a senior enough sponsor within the organization that there is no choice. That's the authority part, and you need to be able to get everybody together within whatever context it's being run at. You have to be able to get everybody together, so it does have a size limit for number of people, right?
And there's also, that is a very advanced technique because you can't offer somebody a pick and mix if they don't know what it is. The first thing they're going to want to do is go through the whole pick and mix and have one of each and find out what they like.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of the time, we're not going to allow that. We don't have the luxury, the money, or the time to do that. And I think this ties back to the original point about, Agile shat the bed, because a lot of coaches, Agile coaches, using the famous rabbit ears, they wanted in there and, like, how do you want to do it? Oh, yeah, I can't tell you, I'm a coach. It's like, yeah, hi, you guys have any idea what you're doing? No, right, okay, well, let's let's do it this way. We're going to get a product vision, we're going to get a product goal, and then we're going to create a sprint goal, which is the first practical step towards our product goal. And we're going to use this framework to drive some value. And we need a definition of done and working agreements. And are you telling us what to do? It's like, yeah, damn right I am, because you haven't got a clue what you're doing about this working. And for me to sit there and go all coaching, like, what do you think is the first step? Is just wasting time and money. And that's why we can, Agile coaches shot themselves in the foot.
That's so. I fundamentally agree at that level, Simon.
But the open space Agile, like what you're talking about, is a very, very advanced technique for very experienced practitioners. And it's all good, for the hippies to sit around the campfire and go, oh man, in a perfect world, we can all choose the perfect solution. Yeah. And we've just spent the previous 45 minutes saying people don't have enough capacity to reflect on improvement. And then you want to tell them, oh, here's a utopic solution. You're smoking crack.
I see where you're coming from. So one thing I do want to add, right, just to tie into what Martin said and with the great success in small organizations. So I've recently been reading the Systemantics book by John Gall, and he has all these laws about systems. And this is one of my favorite laws. So a complex system is found to be evolved from a simple system that worked. And if you try to make a complex system from scratch and you start with it as complex, then you can never make it work. And I think this is the challenge. A large organization is already complex. It's a complex system. And then
absolutely.
Good luck.
I remember being at a conference many years ago, and somebody asked me, this old guy at an Agile conference, and he was like, he was a speaker. He was like, what do you do? And I kind of explained what I do. Like, I go into some of these big organizations, I try and help them, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, why would you do that? Why don't you just let them die? Go find an organization that is small enough that can change and go help them. Leave those big organizations to go die. And that has always stuck with me as well.
So Darwin's law of organizations, right? So
yeah. And that's why I talk about I talk a lot about evolution within the context of organizations, right? Because it is an evolution. You need little mutations, and those mutations are either successful or they're not. And they continually adapt the organization within the context of a niche. And if that niche disappears, Kodak, Blockbuster, right? When the niche disappears, if you didn't do all the stuff to adapt, and you're suddenly at a dead end evolutionary, and you die. And there's a lot of really big organizations in the world that only still exist through financial might, not through viability of their ability to adapt to the niches that are available, right? They have enough money in their coffers that they're zombie organizations.
We could open up a whole other point of discussion. There's only 9 organizations in the world that controls what we eat, right? So we could open up a whole rat hole about wealth perpetuating wealth and the danger of oligarchies, because an oligarch and the power of that is so dangerous, because of course they're just going to be protecting their wealth. But what we've talked about was we started talking about the dangers of copy and paste Agile and why it's failed and what's next. We all agreed that we should go to core principles to help change, to help growth, and we all agreed that that's really hard, and that learning is challenging because complex. Everyone's got their own contexts to that. Systematically, it's going to be tricky. We came up with I dropped in there the whole virus vaccine metaphor. We then thought about steps and managing WIP as a systemic driver to be able to enable people the space to do that. And then we were playing with the idea of build your own Agile, or Agile pick and mix, or that, and how it's often easier to work with smaller organizations than it is for the larger ones because of the many contributing factors. Is that a fair?
Yeah.
wrap up.
It's impressive
Yeah.
that you are able to do that. I was kind of thinking, like, could I do that?
Yeah.
Probably not.
So, Simon's a savant for remembering the context of the conversation.
Thank you for that.
Either that or he's writing stuff down without us noticing.
Yeah.
But, you know,
I don't know.
Maybe a bit of both, but yeah. Have you got any parting thoughts or words of wisdom for us, Mr. D?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we had a lot of interesting discussions and reflections, but to be honest, my conclusion as well is there is a little bit of a way forward, right? But I think we have to remain curious, and because I don't know what it's going to look like. Like, I mean, we all, I mean, if I may reflect, we all haven't seen these big transformations really working, like that they really change these big companies and these nimble, agile organizations. And maybe it's never going to happen, to be frank. Maybe that just isn't in the cards. Maybe the expectation is wrong. You know what I mean? But so I'm just very curious how it's going to evolve. Like what are we going to come up with? What's going to come after Scrum? Because that's. But I'm not going to open that topic now. Because I think we're at the end. But I think I'm very curious what's up next. And yeah, I just wish for more curiosity and less copycat behavior. And that's what I would like to end with.
That's pretty lovely. What's your wrapping up thought, Mr. H?
I think it's what we're experiencing is the same thing that happened just before I joined the world of IT back in 2001, which was the dot-com bubble bursting, and we're in for the Agile bubble burst. Right, and we're in for it doesn't mean it's going away. I just want to be clear on that. Just like when the dot-com bubble burst, the internet didn't go away. It just became infrastructure. I think that's Agile is going to become infrastructure, or at least the practices and frameworks around it. And then we need to focus more on the values and principles within the context, and how do we enable them within organizations. So we need to be more focused on the systemic, the bit that hasn't changed, which is we're trying to do Agile within the context of these large hierarchical organizations, and it just doesn't work because they're fundamentally at odds.
No, so you're building on that. I think Agile is at the bottom of the curve, the hype cycle, the Gartner hype cycle, right? So we're coming out of that. We're going to see a similar thing to that .com thing, where those that were just copying and didn't have a really credible business model, they're going to go to the wall. Sorry about that. If we focus,
and a bunch of technologies went to the wall as well because they weren't really providing. They were only hype driven rather than. And I think that's going to happen too. I think it's already happening.
Well, that's the core, right? And that's what Martin was saying, is if we focus on principles, if we're curious, and what I'd like to add on to that is absolutely get to the core of agility, which is to be ruthless on value whilst compassionate with people and actually deliver. So it's time to stop playing Agile and doing Agile theater and be agile, ruthless on value, compassionate with people, keep shipping, making our customers delighted. That's our way out of this.
Yeah.
Those are beautiful parting words.
Awesome. Do you want to wrap us up, Hinch?
I don't know that I do. I could hang out for.
Excellent. Right, so that's it. That was another episode of Agile Actually. Special thanks to Maarten Dalmijn. Find him on LinkedIn, Google him, Bing him, search it, other search.
Read his book.
Read goals.
Read his book.
Until next time, hit us up, subscribe, do all that good social media stuff. What would you like us to talk about next? Do you have somebody that you would like us to talk to? See you on the next time. And that was this round of Agile Actually. Thank you.